Welcome to Building While Flying, a Sasha Group podcast where we interview business leaders about how they tackle challenges, stay resilient, and navigate ever-changing skies.
Hey, Sasha Nation. Thanks for all of your questions. We went through them all, and I think I've got some answers here for you that you might be interested in. But as always, we love hearing from you all, and we'll look forward to doing more of these types of episodes in the future. The first question comes from Switch Grocery. She's asking us how to make content creation more efficient. So, there's a lot of different ways you can make content creation more efficient. I gave you guys a little bit of a sampler when I was talking with James on the last episode, when I gave the TikTok example, right? If you go into your year or your whatever the allotted time frame is with the idea that everything that you produce is going to have multiple chances at having life on social media, you can obviously cut down on the amount of raw pieces of content you need to create for each platform, right? So that was the 900 on TikTok. You can get down to 450 if you realize that every 6 months you want to kind of recycle content, put it on with a different caption, different hashtags, all that kind of stuff. So that's more of like a mentality aspect of it. Another way you can do it is you can kind of observe what your natural behaviors are out in the real world, right? So if you're a person that drives a lot, for instance, and that's a place where you spend 30 minutes, 60 minutes a day, well, you could put a dash cam on your car and you could be talking to your audience while you're driving. And that could be a specific type of theme of content you could be putting out there. And so, it may not be exactly what you had envisioned, but it could be a way in which you're able to source more content to put onto social media, right? So I think that's kind of it. We always talk about hacking algorithms, but sometimes the amount of content that we're creating, we really have to figure out how to hack ourselves and how to hack our lifestyles. I use this analogy all the time because when we talk about strategic organic content and really being great at putting a lot of stuff out there, I use the analogy of the bottle of water in the ocean, right? You could have the best tasting bottle of water, bottle of mineral water, whatever it is that's ever been created on Earth, and you dump it in the ocean, nobody will ever know it existed, right? That's how much content is on the internet. So, same mentality applies to you could have something go viral. 2 weeks later, it doesn't matter. You got to constantly be working at figuring out how to get as much content out there as possible that stays within your brand parameters and really lives up to what you're trying to exude from a brand perspective. So it is a numbers game to some extent. So don't just hack algorithms, hack yourself. All right, and the next question comes from Automated Marketing. I have lots of creative campaign ideas with not much advertising budget. What are the best ways to utilize and deploy these ideas and get the most out of them? Well, the great thing about it is that you could be testing all of those ideas in social media right now without any money at all, right? As long as you have an iPhone or an Android phone that has access to TikTok and LinkedIn and Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, you could be putting these themes out there on those platforms. And specifically, I bring those up for a reason, because those are the platforms out there right now that are offering the most free reach and the most attention to influencers, brands, everyday people. Meaning, if you post to those platforms, and not only just those platforms, but also the products within those platforms. So, right, there's TikTok, it's vertical video. There's Instagram, but really it's Reels that you have to think about. There's YouTube, but really it's YouTube Shorts that you have to think about. If you're thinking in the right terms and the places where those platforms are willing to give you free reach, you can be testing out these themes for free every single day and seeing which ones rise to the top and which ones are failing, right? And so as you go on and on and on, just keep putting these themes out there. And over time, you're gonna build enough body of evidence to whether or not you're building audience because of certain themes and not because of others. So once you start to understand what patterns are emerging when you're putting these pieces of content out there, eventually shut down some of the underperformers, maybe give them another shot down the road via a couple tweaks, but then start introducing in some more themes as you're going along. And really, it's just that game over and over and over again. And eventually it starts spilling into other platforms that start to rise up and give out the free reach as well. But you're always going to want to keep cycling these themes through your free organic social media engines. The next question comes to us from Tina Powell, who asks, what is the most effective marketing strategy on LinkedIn for your clients? Well, there's not really one strategy that we use for clients on LinkedIn. And I think it really depends on whether or not you're talking about like a B2B company that's selling software to customers and they're using ad products on LinkedIn, or if we're talking about a personal brand that's using LinkedIn to just get their brand out there a little bit more. But there's a lot of things that are effective in the space right now. I'd say number one, LinkedIn is one of those platforms that we have our eye on because they do have the ability to give free reach out to folks, brands, influencers, people in general. And their algorithm works in a very unique way. So realistically, if you comment on other people's content, that's still going to give you distribution on their platform. So one of the great things is you don't need to just create your own content. You also have to put yourself and your brand out there as a thought leader in your specific space. So you want to be looking at your newsfeed. You want to be commenting on and liking and engaging in content with as many brands and influencers in the space as possible that are relevant to your genre. And that will bring you additional reach that you weren't necessarily counting on. Most people think about content, they think about how am I putting out my original content and how am I building my brand through that original content. Or they think, how am I going to put a scalable message out there in an ad campaign, drive my CPMs down, drive my cost per conversion, or drive my conversions up. And that's not necessarily the only way you need to be thinking about it. Think about LinkedIn as a source for you to really connect and build community. Through that community, you will eventually build revenues. Next, from Tina, we also have, what important trends do you see for marketers and brands? Well, I think there's a lot of undeniable trends that are going on right now, but I think nothing has really caught the eye of prospect marketers, brands that are coming up in the space, or even mature brands as Web3 and specifically NFTs. If you haven't dropped an NFT collection right now, you're certainly paying attention to what's going on in the space right now. You're educating yourself and you're figuring out whether or not an NFT drop is something that you want to get involved in. So I've seen a lot of this specifically since about last May, which to nobody's surprise is when Gary launched VFriends. So I think the amount of weight that he has in the market, especially his relationships that he has with CMOs and CEOs across the country, has definitely made a massive splash. And you see a lot of brands picking up the phone, calling VaynerMedia, calling Sasha Group about how they can get involved in the world of Web3, metaverse, NFTs, and so on and so forth. And I don't necessarily blame them. I don't necessarily know whether or not the technology is something that every brand can benefit from today, because there's going to be a lot of successes and a lot of failures. It's very experimental right now. But at the very least, you need to educate yourself on the space and understand whether or not it's something that you can play in. The next question we have comes from JP out in Hawaii, John Paul Gedian. I think that's how you pronounce your last name, but correct me if I'm wrong, JP. You know how to get a hold of me. How would the Sasha Group or VaynerMedia choose to use out-of-home media either for their clients or your own companies and podcasts and media channels? That's a great question, JP. I think it kind of boils down to, in our universe, we think about attention first and foremost. So where the current state of attention is for us is typically in social media. Doesn't mean out of home can't play its part in an integrated effort when it comes to putting a message out there. I think about something like a VCon, for instance, right? There's going to be obviously the pageantry around the buildup and the hype machine that Gary and team build to get VCon off the ground. But you're also talking about Minneapolis. There's, even if people don't wind up coming to VCon that happen to live in that area, you still want to sort of educate the area on what the event is, what's going on there, so on and so forth. I think it's also a big boon for the Minneapolis economy. It's a big boon for commerce in general. So I think you can look at out of home as kind of that window dressing around large scale events, whether it's coming from a brand perspective or it's coming from the local chamber of commerce or the local governments. And then I think, outside of that, I think you can go industry by industry, right? There's some brands that live in highly regulated categories that can't operate on platforms like TikTok because the audience is too young, right? So the thing that comes off the top of my head is the cannabis industry. In certain states, it's not even legal in the United States, right? So you have to not only go to states to do your advertising in which it's legal in those municipalities, but you also can't use certain channels to reach your intended audience. And that's where an out-of-home can come in, and be a very effective marketing vessel for you and your brand. I think about brands like Cann, C-A-N-N, THC-infused seltzer water. If you go to Los Angeles right now, you can't go 2 blocks without seeing an out-of-home board or a wild posting for Cann. I also think about local service businesses, right? So, a lot of personal injury lawyers are all over billboards in certain cities, and that's a great way of effectively communicating with certain demographics in those backyards. So, I'd say first and foremost, you understand from a broad perspective, out-of-home might not be the best solution if you're trying to stitch together a national campaign. But when you look at it on the local level, there's a lot of different ways that it can be support marketing for other bigger initiatives. And then from there, you look on a brand by brand basis or a vertical by vertical basis. You as a marketer that runs an out-of-home company, you should be targeting certain verticals because of their inability to use platforms that have all the attention or have captured all the attention. That's my answer. Next, we've got from Jeff Humphreys. Jeff up in Calgary, another fantastic 4Ds customer and Stork member. How do you build out possible topics for always on content? Do you have any suggestions or ideas for coming up with personal branding, always on content? Yes, I do. I think you have to separate your brand and your business to some extent, right? Yes, they are inextricably linked. Yes, you can use your personal brand to drive business on your actual corporate brand, but they don't have to be the same thing, obviously. You don't have to look much further than Gary himself to understand that Gary talks about things in his personal brand that have nothing to do with VaynerMedia. They're just things that he's personally interested or passionate about. And that would be my first step for you. I know you're interested in music. I know you're interested in production. I know you're interested in podcasting. I know you're interested in a lot of different topics because I see you out there in the market doing all these things. First and foremost, make your personal brand about things that you care deeply about. Things that, if you wanted to pivot out of your career as a marketer, what could you sit around talking about every single day without getting tired, right? Focus on sprinkling some of those things in there because I think people will see the authenticity and the passion start to come through. You might be able to build out some niche audience that you otherwise wouldn't have. And then one day you might be able to figure out how to connect the dots between that passion pursuit and what you do from a corporate standpoint on a day-to-day basis. Take that for what it is and just kind of figure out how to constantly be creating content. So starting with your passions first. And then obviously, there's some things that people aren't willing to talk about because they think they're too boring, but there's always an audience for different things. Like one thing that comes to mind is as the operator of a business, how do you answer your emails, right? That's like a fountain of content that most people don't even realize exists, right? When people email you and they're asking you questions, they're asking for you as an expert to help qualify what they've got going on in their minds. So just opening up emails or listening to comments on social and responding to them gives you an opportunity to turn on a camera, get your face on that camera, get your opinions out there, and take something like a relatively mundane task that you do for hours on end anyway and turn it into content, right? That's also something that's very much more connected to what you're doing on the corporate side, but the way that you answer it kind of shows your expertise and based on how passionate you get about the topic, that can make people feel really great about working with you. So thanks a lot, Sasha Nation, for tuning into another episode of Building While Flying. I'm really kind of getting used to answering your questions, so I'm going to have to talk to Julia and Stefan. Maybe we'll make this a regular occurrence. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that, but I'm really enjoying myself talking to you guys in this format. So be sure to subscribe. Be sure to keep listening to Building While Flying because we're really working hard to make this content appealing to you.